himself for 5 minutes. Dear friends, I do have some consternation, and my consternation emanates from 2008, when I, as a member of this very committee, sat down on a lower part of the dais, and I was here when then Secretary Hank Paulson appeared. He sat right out in front. I remember Cleaver was to my left, I believe, and Scott was to my right. The secretary wanted $700 billion. He had approximately, I thought, 5 pages asking for $700 billion. I've since read that it was 3 pages. Be that as it may, $700 billion to bail out what were called exotic products at the time. $700 billion. Well, as you can well imagine, my constituents were up in arms. They were calling me by the hundreds, demanding that I vote against a $700 billion bailout. Being the good steward that I am, I voted against it. And as I stood in the cloakroom and I could see the tabulation of votes, there also was a monitor, television monitor, and I could see the monitor indicating that the vote was failing, and the stock market was directly proportional to what was happening with the vote. As the bill failed, the stock market was going down. The next day, my constituents were calling by the hundreds. What is wrong with you? You voted against the bailout. My 401k is now at risk. I learned an important lesson. Do what you think is in the best interest of your constituents, even when they may disagree. This hearing is taking place because I think it's in the best interest of my constituents that we get a better understanding of what we're dealing with. I remember Secretary Bernanke. I have a statement from him that I'd like to read, and I'll do this quickly. Here's what he said. He said, this is Chairman Ben Bernanke, former Federal Reserve Chairman, that the $182 billion bailout of American International Group made him angrier than anything in the recession. AIG took risk with unregulated products like hedge funds, I'm paraphrasing, while using cash from people's insurance policies. He said the government had no choice but to bail it out. Who knew AIG was the glue holding the world together, the global order together? This is of concern to me. And Ms. Hammer and Ms. Goldstein, if I can get to both of you, I'd like your comments on my concern. You've mentioned FSOC. I don't know how that will help us with a living will, for example. This is of concern to me. How do we manage a behemoth once it becomes so big that if it fails, it may bring a sizable portion of the economy with it? Nothing is too big to fail, but you can be so big that if you fail, you'll hurt the economy. So, Ms. Hammer, let's start with you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your question, and I fully agree with your statements about the importance of evaluating potential systemic risk where taxpayer dollars are concerned. I often speak in my law class about the difference between an emergency response and a proactive policymaking framework. And the problem with an emergency response is that it's inherently backwards looking, and you create what's known as an emergency state relationship between the actors. We have the opportunity through the FSOC and Dodd-Frank Section 120 to create a proactive policy framework for cryptocurrency. That means gathering and evaluating data, coordinating the agencies, creating a committee that could consult with the many states that are legislating in this area as we speak, and consulting with international standard-setting bodies. And You mentioned living wills, Mr. Chairman. I think that's an important point because there are many aspects of our regulatory framework that still need to be ferreted out and relate to cryptocurrency. And so I strongly believe that's the place to start, and that we have resources to do it, and that by putting together our collective minds that we can tackle this problem.
Thank you. My time has expired. My apologies, Ms. Goldstein. But if you would submit comments for the record, I would greatly appreciate it. Dear friends, I thank the witnesses for their testimony and for devoting the time and resources to share their considerable expertise with the subcommittee. Your testimony today will help to advance the important work of this subcommittee and of the U.S. Congress in understanding and addressing the risks and opportunities inherent in widespread investment in digital assets, including cryptocurrencies. The chair notes that some members may have additional questions for this panel, which they may wish to submit in writing. Without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 5 legislative days for members to submit written questions to the witnesses and to place their responses in the record. Also, without objection, members will have 5 legislative days to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I remind members to submit their written questions and materials for the record to the email address provided to your staff. Dear friends, the hearing is now adjourned.